Hey y'all, welcome back to our Advent journey together. Thank you so much for the privilege of being able to be a part of this with you. It's an honor. We've been walking through this journey, these 4 weeks leading up to the moment of Christmas, and Christians around the world are walking with us on this kind of pilgrimage, intentionally entering into this time of waiting, of hoping, and of longing that we know finds its fulfillment in the arrival of Jesus at Christmas, and at the same time also looks ahead with hope to the return of Christ, knowing that he will keep that promise as well. So as we've been on this Advent journey together, each of these 4 weeks, we're looking at through the lens of one of the 4 Gospels in each of these weeks. And so we've been through Matthew and Mark and Luke, and that leads us in this session to the Gospel of John. Once again, we're going to pick up right at the beginning with the first verse from the first chapter and read here out of what is called the prologue of the book of John. Here's what it says. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of humanity. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. I love how John begins his gospel here with this poetic prologue. It's a very intentional kind of beginning, and even using that term of the beginning right at the opening of his gospel. Those first 3 words of his gospel, in the beginning. Where have we heard that before? The original readers of this gospel would have immediately made the connection all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created. And they would have made that connection and imagine that that's where John is about to go. And John says this in this familiar language with this familiar terminology. He then turns our attention to Jesus. And he's making this declaration here in this opening statement that Jesus is the new creation story, that what went wrong in the garden is about to be healed through the person of Jesus. As we can trace our brokenness, follow the fractures all the way back to the fall in the book of Genesis. The Gospel of John is telling us that Jesus is a new creation story. John continues that intentional echo back to the book of Genesis throughout this poetic prologue with the way that he uses the term light. 7 different times he uses that word in these opening verses, and that makes that immediate connection in the minds of the people as well. It's another layer of connection, that number 7 with the term light, connecting us back to those elements that we see in the creation story in the Genesis narrative. And the term light will continue to play a key role throughout the Gospel of John as he's telling this narrative of the life of Jesus. And he knows we're going to need that. He's very honest about the power of darkness and the reality of darkness, and yet he's blunt and clear about the hope of the light that we have in Jesus. One of the great privileges of my life is I was able to be a part of a church planting team that was planting a church right in the heart of the downtown of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, my beloved hometown. And as part of our strategy and mission of planting that church, all of the pastors took on other jobs in the community as a way of financially supporting the mission, but also strategically putting us out in the community to engage with the people in the community. One of our pastors, through that, worked at the Chamber of Commerce until he was named vice president of the Chamber of Commerce. This really significant role, an influential role in our community. Unlike him, my role was I was a substitute teacher at the local middle school and high school. Very glamorous. In my mind, I saw it going somewhat like a scene out of Dead Poets Society, where as this teacher, I was going to inspire the kids with my grasp of poetry or maybe my lecture on the book To Kill a Mockingbird, and I was going to transform their lives and raise up a new generation who were going to follow me into the noble profession of substitute teaching. That did not happen. Most of the time, they actually put me in the study hall, which shows you the level of trust that they had in my academic prowess. But one day, I did get to teach the freshman literature class at this school. And we were discussing a short story that the class was reading together. And in the discussion among the students there, I'll never forget what one of the students pointed out about that story. This shaggy-haired kid kind of shyly raised his hand and then offered this observation. He said this: all throughout the story, there was darkness. It was tense and it was dangerous, but hope was always present. There was something about the way that he shared that grabbed my heart and made the connection back to this, to our story, to the story of Jesus. John is very honest with us that all throughout the story there is darkness, it is tense, it is dangerous, and yet through it all, this thread runs in the story. Hope is always present. The light is shining even in the darkness, and not even the darkness can overcome it. As we've been moving through this Advent journey together and getting closer and closer to this reality of Christmas, the Christmas moment that we've been waiting and longing for, I'm thinking more and more about this symbol of light and how it is such a crucial symbol to this season and to our journey together. In one of the other gospel accounts, speaking of the birth of Jesus, it speaks about the timing. And I'm not just talking about the time in history or the season of year, but it tells us that Jesus was born at night. At night. I think there's something so significant just about those two words, and then how it ties in with how John begins his gospel, speaking to the reality of darkness, and yet in the midst of that darkness, the light is breaking through. Light is a consistent symbol of this season, and that is important. Yes, it's about the lights that we hang on our Christmas trees, or the Moravian stars that we put on our porches, or some of us who decorate our houses with so much light that they can be seen from space, probably. All of that is wonderful. But I think the enduring symbol of light when we think of the Advent season is, of course, the Advent candle. And we've made our way around the Advent wreath and lighting the different candles throughout this season. And you've probably been a part of that, of lighting the candle of hope and joy and of peace and of love. And I think it's so significant that it's that small little flicker of light. And you wonder what a tiny little flame like that, a little flicker of light, can do against such great darkness that we see in our world. And yet as Christians, we join in with believers all around the world, all around the globe, as we light those candles in defiant acts of hope, declaring that the light has come. The light is shining in the darkness, and the darkness has not, cannot, will not overcome it. On Christmas Eve, followers of Jesus across so many different cultures are going to gather together in stadiums and in cathedrals and in homes and in caves and even in a little movie theater that I know of. and they will light candles, and they will pass this flame one person to the next, reminding us what kind of story we are part of. We will sing songs by it. We will read these scripture passages by that light, filled with hope, knowing that we have witnessed the reality of it becoming real. And we know that no matter how much the darkness howls against it or threatens it, the darkness has no chance of snuffing out this light. The prophet says that the people living in darkness have seen a great light, that those living in the valley of the shadows, on them the light has dawned. The morning himself has arrived, and we live in his light. And while that image of the candle might warm our hearts with its glow, with this kind of sentimentality about this season, we do have to remember it's still a fire. It's still a fire. And another one of the prophets reminds us that the Messiah who was to come, the messenger who himself is the message, is going to come as a fire, as a refining fire. We do believe that this light is changing the world, but this light is changing us. There's transformation that happens in that refiner's fire. Things are purified that cannot make the journey forward. And all of this is a part of being refined as silver and gold. Yes, there's deep sentiment in the beauty of that glowing candle, but we do have to remember this is still a fire that we're talking about, and it's a transforming fire. Not the kind of fire that sets out to destroy, but the kind of fire that has the power to transform. And there's so much hope in that. This light of the world has come to change the world, but be warned, he is going to start with you. So the Gospel of John frames this Jesus story from the beginning as a cosmic story. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It is this cosmic scope that John is telling us about. And out of the void of the darkness, the light is breaking through and transforming the world. So there's this massive scope to what John is talking about. And yet I love this beautiful turn that happens down in verse 14 when he's talking about the Word being with God, and the Word was God. And then that scandalous turn, and the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The author becomes the protagonist. The creator steps into the story to take on the lead role. The cosmic becomes small enough for us to see, small enough to be held in his mother's arms. This massive image of eternity that John is attempting to paint for us with such poetic beauty here, he then brings down and says all of that eternity, though, is brought down into this small moment. And we're standing on the edge of that small moment here. At the culmination of our Advent journey together, we've been waiting, we've been hoping, we've been longing, and now here we are at the edge of that small moment when the world is about to change. It's a small moment where the promise you've been longing for still somehow catches you by surprise in its beauty. A small moment when seas begin to split open and a way gets made, when giants start to stumble, when an empire flinches and a kingdom rises, when the God who fills every corner of creation makes himself small enough to fit into a manger, when a baby takes his first breath and gives creation a second chance.